members of the Culture Keepers, Culture Makers art project who are with us today. And we begin with the story of how we landed in the same room together. And then we'll hear from some of the artists. 3 years ago, the First Baptist Church of Exeter held a service to honor the 9 people who died in the historic black church in Charleston, South Carolina, where a white male committed a mass shooting during a Bible study. After that tragedy and the memorial service was over, a member of the First Baptist Church here said, "This is not enough. We have to do something more." So Baptist Church member Ken Mendes created the Racial Unity Team of Exeter. He and his wife Joy designed programs like the annual Walk a Mile for Racial Unity, which recognizes the racial heritage of Exeter. If you've taken the walk, you know that each site builds your awareness, it touches hearts. And the intent is to give us a foundation for education and action. I joined the Racial Unity Team 2 years ago, and I told the people at the table about a friend who creates art that depicts how life could be, without segregation, without bias, and without the terrible lack of connection that so many of us experience. This artist friend sees an image in an old magazine of all black girls playing hopscotch in the 1950s, and he adds white girls to that scene on his canvas. He finds a picture of all white men looking under the hood of a car, and he draws in some black men beside them because that's his vision. Connection. Richard Haines is a nationally renowned artist. And as a teacher, he's developed a tracing technique so that anyone, artist or not, may join his trade and express their wish to change our culture. So I wrote a grant for the Racial Unity Team, and we were able to invite Richard to come to work with us in Exeter. And 21 people signed up. So his dream and carefully planned action was to bring us all together to talk and to draw, and to remind us and preach to us that artists create new cultures. Artists are not only culture keepers. So Richard asked us to imagine that our art is to be uncovered by a future generation. He asked, what do you want people to discover from your drawing? How will you show them what it was like to be living in the times when we began emerging into a world without racism? In our conversation as a group, we defined diversity and racial unity, and then Kristen Butterfield, who was our discussion leader and who is a UNH social justice educator, asked us, how did you learn bias and prejudice in the first place? We named off the systems. Some of us named our families. Then we named our schools. We named political and social systems and healthcare systems, citing all the opportunities given to whites only to succeed and thrive. We asked ourselves, how might we have colluded with those systems of oppression? Or did we confront them? For 8 weeks, we talked, laughed, cried, and imagined a better future together. Our first art instruction was to search for a favorite captured moment. It might have been on a magazine or off the web or from personal experiences. And we could take that and extend our imagination on racial unity as Richard had. So we made each image our own, just like in Richard's vision, seeing paths and worlds without bigotry, without prejudice. I just love the people in this project. I grew up Universalist, and you know how mushy Universalists can be. Our leaders Kristen Butterfield and Richard gave us their gifts of building everyday meetings into fellowship. We were blessed to have these two honest, upfront leaders who understood that we all came from very different places. And that was our project. And our gifts will give us their experiences in a bit. We'd like to take a moment here for silent meditation. And we have something special for you today. When you come back from silence, Reverend Mary will play us some music and you'll see a display of our art on the screen up front here to give us all another moment and a time in visual meditation. So now we become one heart and mind for racial justice and meditation as we breathe in peace and breathe out love together. So we've learned what the Culture Keepers, Culture Makers project involved, and now we're happy to hear from some artists. And as they come up to the chancel, welcome, and get comfortable, I'll tell you what they'll be talking about. They'll tell us why they participated, they'll talk about the art that they created, and maybe figure out how art differs from a lecture or a protest in the street. Talk about some connections they made and how they might go forward. So, welcome. Kristen Butterfield, Newful Suetat, and Winton St. Clair. And with us to reflect on this art project. Now, of course, I want to know how you got into this art project. What pulled you in?
Are we just gonna? Good morning. What's good? It's interesting. I can't remember how I found out about the project. I think it was Kristen who told me about it, and then like, really berated me into coming. It's actually how I get my job. My sister did the same thing to me. But I think what drew me to the project to actually participate is the ability of art to communicate ideas that are universally receivable. And so when you have an issue like racism that you want to not only interact with, but have others interact with you, the medium of visual art is a way that you can communicate without being misheard. And it's a way that you can communicate very heartfelt ideas that really will resonate with someone and stick with you.
I was just going to add that what was interesting is that probably that is how Wynton got into the project, but I had never met him before. And we actually only knew each other through my sister. And so I think that speaks to the power of community, that I felt connected to someone to say, you should really do this, I think you'll like it, because of my sister. So there was sort of a community connection that happened. And I think that's sort of how a lot of people got involved in this project.
Yeah.
So. And just briefly, I got involved because Richard asked me if I was interested to help facilitate, and that was a growing edge for me, to facilitate conversations around race, and I was very excited about it, and I wasn't even sure I was going to stay through the art portion, and then I was like, you know, I really should, for continuity's sake, be part of this, and that part was very, I mean, life-changing is such a kind of big statement, but it was, that part was very impactful to be part of the art, and I think it opened up a lot of things I didn't realize it would. So I was thankful to be brought in to have the conversation around race and then to be able to continue with everyone. So.
Well, I don't really remember, but I remember my wife Mariama, who was an artist with us, sharing something on Facebook with me, and I saw two words, art, racial and unity. I'm like, yeah, sure, we need to do this. And I didn't even know there was art involved or anything. I remember we showed up late. We just showed up and I'm like, you hear race and unity. I lived here for quite a bit in the Seacoast area for about 17 years. Race and unity don't go together very often. So I was like, I'm interested to see what this group of people are trying to accomplish. And that's what brought me in, and thankfully so.
So that leads us to talk about the art you created. Tell us how you landed on your topic and such.
Looks like I'm going first, though. This is very, very nice. So my piece, which was not up here, and I unfortunately wasn't able to finish, is depicted of these two police officers kind of rushing this beautiful, elegant black woman who was in this like flowing dress at a protest. The only thing she had in her hands were flowers as she was walking towards this police line that were all their own SWAT gear. So I picked out these two police officers who were kind of rushing her with the zip ties. And it was interesting kind of in the forming of, my reforming I should say, in Richard's style, my reforming of this image, noticing how I was coloring the police was very robotic. And so they were kind of devoid of what we might attribute life to in the way that we look at color. So they were very, almost like metal blue tones. And it wasn't really necessarily done intentional, I just thought it would look interesting. But the way that it came out that way, and then the other piece, the other side of the piece, this woman, I actually ended up transforming her into this woman who's kind of dissolving into petals. So this kind of representation of life, and of kind of something we might call Gaia or like an earth spirit or whatever. You know, that she ended up having like flowers in her hair, and then like her whole body dissolved into these petals that were flowering. So this contrast between kind of soullessness and roboticism and rigidity and fluidity and life and growth. And so but this contrast also, I think, is representational of how we often engage with each other, where on one hand, when you have very beautiful, wonderful friendships, whether they be between people of opposite races or opposite sexes, opposite genders, what makes them wonderful is what is shared between them and how they grow, rather than the transactional nature of them, which is sometimes how we interact with people or institutions of power.
My art piece was there, but I don't think you guys saw it.
It was when it was still small.
It was always so small. How did I come up about it? I really don't know. most of the artists who were with us in the project did not think I was going to finish because I was just stuck. I'm not an artist, I'm an engineer. I solve problems. There's a problem, I'm going to solve it. What do you mean, an artist? What do you mean? I'm going to create something that people can connect with and understand what message I'm trying to... What? No. No. There are videos for giving a message. That's what I always thought. But every day sitting, I picked a picture of 300 people being naturalized, because I was naturalized in 2008, and that was a big moment in my life. So I picked that, but I didn't know what to go about it. And then I picked a picture of people in Boston, don't shoot in front of them to protect them. But as the art session went on, and Rich, every day, every time, he gave us a little bit of his wisdom and message. And he kept talking about love, whatever it's out there, focus on love. Just love, and it was at the end was able to take the immigration picture and wrap it around love and diversity and messages of hope and all that. And what? I finished it.
Yeah.
I did, and people loved it. I don't. Actually, I go around and tell people I'm an artist.
It's hard to follow that. My piece, similarly, I do not think of myself as a creative person or an artist at all, so this was a real challenge to kind of get into that mindset, and I think it caused me to learn to give myself permission to be creative in that way and just sort of think about what the possibilities could be. And Richard was such a wonderful teacher because he led us through the steps where all of a sudden you got to the end and you're like, wow, I did create this beautiful piece of art. So my piece was also small, and it was the people that were in a line linked arm in arm, and then behind them was, so you could sort of see like two equal signs and a heart in the middle. And the image actually came from a friend of mine who does a lot of peaceful protesting in New York City, and she now lives in the Bay Area, and I just love this image, and she's someone who inspires me a lot because it's on all different issues that she always stands in resistance and in connection with other people. So I love that image of connected resistance with the arms linked. And then it was really important to me to think about, we were really specifically talking about race, and racial justice is very important. Along with that, we can't forget that all of our identities have to come together, and so the intersectional piece was important to me. And so the equal sign in the hearts represented equality, and then the colors I chose were specifically representative of the rainbow and the trans flag colors to be inclusive of LGBTQ identities. And I just felt it was important to bring all of that into the room because we can't have one without the other. We can't have any of those without the others. And so some of the quotes I was thinking about are none of us are free if any of us are chained. And so that was just important to me to represent in my art, because I think one of the things we talk about, like Richard said, if someone were to see this in the future, what would they take out of it? And I wanted people to be able to see themselves reflected in that no matter what their identities might be. So I tried to think about age and class and race and LGBT identity all involved.
And you succeed.
And I drew a picture of Ruby Bridges, the iconic young girl who was the first to go to an integrated school. You remember the Norman Rockwell painting of her, and with the U.S. Marshals flanking her. So a lot of us did these everyday people on the front lines of these massive events that they had no control over, and their stories really told us what we're made of. So how does art differ from a protest in the street for you, or any other way of expressing these issues?
This is the question that I don't exactly have an answer for. But I think we need all of it, personally. I think protests in the street are extremely important. I think rallies, I think ways of gathering people together are very real. I think everyone is going to be connected to something in a different way. So I think the art piece was so important because, as Winton kind of talked about, we never know what people are going to receive out of that when they look at our art. And so I think it can speak to different people in different ways, which I think is very powerful. And I think it allows you to express things in a nonverbal way. So I love what you said, like you can't be misunderstood in your art. I think that's really powerful. So I just think sometimes these feelings are beyond words and we can't always explain them, but you can feel something in a different way, and this project really did that for me.
All that, and one more thing. We all been to demonstrations. They ended a long time ago. The one yesterday ended yesterday. The piece of art is still living. People are still connecting with it. And the goal was the next generation. They still probably gonna look at it. So that's another side of art.
No, I'm trying to construct my thoughts coherently. So I think protest has its place in this. A lot of what you were saying. Protest has a place, and I think it has a wonderful place within a functional society, especially when you're dealing with issues that affect the marginalized and the unheard. I think it ends at protest. I think that's what you were saying. If it ends at protest, we get nowhere. It's a part of a piece of a puzzle that is often necessary. I like to think of there's this idea of constructive resilience, which is probably a more inclusive way to look at not only protest, but how we interact with society in a way that is not combative, but rather is, again, the name is constructive. And I mean, the simplest way to think about it is what's the best way to get rid of all your enemies? Is to make them friends. I think through the arts, that's one way that we can engage in constructive resilience. So if one is being oppressed, it's not to face your oppressor in the street, to show up at their doorstep and yell, to picket their business. Even though that has a place, in the long term, how you overcome your oppressor is to engage them meaningfully through a language that you both can understand, so that you come to a unified vision, a unified understanding of reality. And art absolutely has a very tangible and real way of doing that, in which I think everybody enters into art on an equal playing field, especially if you're not an artist.
I think, again, that kinesthetic connection to someone you're painting or drawing, I felt akin to Ruby Bridges, although I could never know how terrifying it must have been for her. Like an author who writes a biography, you begin to think like that person a bit, and so I hold her in my heart every day. So what connections did you make, or how did you feel connected differently through the artwork process? What was the meaning for it?
Connection to the art.
Connections did you make?
First connection, I had service with art first time. Again, I didn't know I could make it, but every day I learned that the art you put, it's just the colors, the message from Rich, the conversations having with every member who was there is what made my piece, at least, as far as I'm concerned. It's talking to this person about their experience, about what the racism is to them, what racial equality to them is. And they're like, I never looked at it that way. And then the other person has a totally different view to it. And I was like, all right, well that probably makes me a racist. I never thought about it that way. And the process, it's a long-lasting process. The project ended a month ago, and I still think about it. And I still can't wait to start another project similar for another subject or anything else.
I think, so we had 3 sessions of conversation about race, and then we moved into the art part, but I felt like at the end, by the time we got to the end, there was this little family that was created through the process, and I just felt so connected to everyone, even if I didn't have a lot of personal conversations with everyone in the group. But especially while we were doing art, what I realized is while you're doing something else and not looking at someone in your eyes, you're actually able to talk a lot more freely sometimes. So we would be sitting and just coloring and trying out a different color, what do we call it? Color, yeah, like studies. Yes, color studies, what we wanted to do. And conversations would just happen and people would be sharing about their personal lives and like, oh, that happened to me too. And then it would connect back to our conversation about race. And so I just found like we all connected inevitably, and that wasn't even one of the main goals, but it happened through the process. And I love that, and I think that's what makes me feel like I haven't seen these guys since, I don't know, when did it end? October? And immediately coming back, I felt this great sense of excitement again. So I think the art process, as you said, created this connection that we're all doing this thing together. We also had a lot of late nights at the end, painting this big piece. And we're like, we're just gonna end at 8, and then it was 9:30, and we're just gonna end, and then, but it was really exciting to work on something, which I think speaks to process in general of working on a group project, but the conversations we had through that were also really connecting.
Reflecting on what Kristen said, people would sit there and remember stories that they hadn't called up for years and years just because of that courageous space or that space that you created. So what did you learn about yourself?
I think that I learned that I can be an artist. That was a big one. I'm like really excited about this piece and I can't wait to do it again. I learned that you should never underestimate yourself because, yeah, I mean, we all created art pieces. I'm not sure we thought that we could. And that was through Richard's encouragement and great mentorship and leadership and support. I also learned that, which I've known for a long time, but it was reinforced to me that it's very important for me to feel like I did a good job and that I can be perfect at something. And so through the facilitation process especially, I had to keep reminding myself, this is not going to be perfect. We're all going to make some mistakes and we're all going to say things that might hurt a little, but that's the process, and then we talk about it and keep going. And so I learned it was a reminder to say, we got to plow through this and it's not going to be perfect. And then similarly in the art piece, I might have colored a little bit in the wrong section here, but I'll just fix it by doing this, and then I'll just go to the next part. And as a whole, it's still going to look beautiful. And so the idea of reminding myself not always to try to be perfect or just accept that that's never going to happen was something I learned and am continuing to learn.
Well, what I learned, the art part was one big side, of course, but the conversation that you led when we covered the prejudice, and all the different aspects that all contribute to racism to me. I learned a lot about myself after those discussions. When you go back home and you think about the conversation and you started analyzing what you do and you're like, see, you have this thing against this group of people yourself. So pay attention to that. So I learned that all of us, every single, probably from looking deep, usually somebody immigrates is subject to racism, but no. Go both ways. You know, when you look at somebody and you're like, well, he had it because he was born here and his father paid it. You know what? No. He probably earned it. He probably worked harder than you. So respect that. You don't know the person. Those deep thoughts, dirty thoughts that we have and we don't come up with them, I start bringing up myself. And just, no, don't say that. Yeah. That's the biggest thing that came out of this project.
I think like being really frank is one of the things I learned was how much continual healing I need as a black man in America. I think that during the process there's There's a meditative quality to art that I think you touched on. There's a side of your being, I was going to say your mind, but I think your being, that is allowed to both process, to express, and to heal when you're creating, especially when you're creating with others around such an issue. And yeah, I think that just realizing how light you feel coming out of that, or at least how I felt coming out of those spaces. And I think part of it is having the visual reality that there are other people who don't look like you, who are concerned about your well-being, is one thing, which you don't often get that refresher. I don't often get that refresher, at least. The other part of that is actually creating art that expresses the continual pain you have. It's like being able to face a certain reality of your life. Not the entire reality, because that's not my entire reality, but a part of my reality in a way that is helpful, and it's not traumatic either, because I can go back and I remember exactly where I was during Charlotte, and I remember where I was during Ferguson, and I remember where I was the day after, which staying home from work and kind of not feeling like going outside. So you remember these traumatic events, and going back to them, it's not constructive. But exploring those feelings and exploring those realities and those parts of myself through art and through creation, especially with others who share those convictions, is very healing, and it's very constructive. And something that Kristen was saying earlier is that these relationships aren't fleeting either. When you're creating something together, when you're engaging in constructive activity, the relationships you form are not fleeting. There are opportunities to create more. I mean, this is the reason why I'm here today. It's because I was asked to come here. And I was like, oh, of course, these are people who I actually enjoy spending time with, and I appreciate their input. And we have a relationship, and I'm sure we're going to be doing more things together. But it's because of these constructive experiences that we've had together, these creative experiences that we shared together, and the healing that I was able to do in their presence, or allowed to do in their presence.
How will you go forward differently?
Sounds okay. Well, we'll definitely do more art, for sure. But as I said earlier, I lived around for a while, and I spent the first half of my 17 years at UNH studying. When I was there, I never felt racism. It's students, they are having fun and studying. I never thought about it. And then I graduated, did work here, and after I got naturalized, life here was so perfect. I had families, they call me son, and they have me in their calendars, and I never even thought about racism. First, when I got in at 2001, it was a little icky, and then I think as New England, we got over it quickly, and we moved on. Traveled for 5 years around the world, seeing what's out there. Like, all right, this is this is a utopia as far as I'm concerned, and let's see what's out there. And came back in 2012, picked up a job, working, not getting engaged. I have my set of friends and their families, but I forgot the role I have as an immigrant is to engage with other people, to give them the opportunity to know about me, myself, and my culture. I owe it to the society. And I forgot about it until elections started. And all what was hidden started popping up in the surface. The people I was working with, where I thought, fine, we didn't win, and I see the conversation, like, hey, you're talking about me? I'm part of those people. Well, you're an exception. I'm like, no, I'm not. So, okay, no, I used to be probably the most sociable person I used to know, and then I closed that door and focused on my career and my life. And I guess it's time to open up again and go meet people, educate them, and learn from them again. It's needed.
I think what I'll take moving forward is that there's always more power in connection, and I know that, but I think I think often about how when you're younger and you go through school and different things, you're inevitably in a group where you make friends because you're sort of in like a shared space. And then as you go older and you become an adult and you're in your work life and your home life, I feel a little bit like your world gets smaller and you know who your relationships are, but you don't necessarily always go out and meet new people. And so this was such a wonderful experience to get to meet so many people that I don't know in a community. And I think part of the reason, going back to one of the questions, I wanted to be part of this is because I have these conversations a lot. I work at the University of New Hampshire and I'm in a group of people where we're always thinking about the structures at UNH and who they're impacting and who they're not serving and all of that. But that feels like a bubble a little bit, and I feel so lucky to have been able to get to know a group of people in a community that I don't know. And just the feeling that comes from that, I think it inspires you and it gives me more energy to continue to do the work and feel like I have the energy to do it. So it's sort of like works against burnout. I think it works against feeling exhausted by all of the challenges that exist, because when we build relationships with people and have those connections, I think it just fuels us to keep going and it makes me feel stronger. And just a reminder that that's so important. It's important to meet new people and build those connections, and it brings life. So that's, I think moving forward, I'm gonna, sometimes when I'm like, ooh, I think I'd rather just kind of stay and do my own thing, like, no, take that step and meet the person and see how that goes.
I think similarly, I don't know how differently my life is going to be going. I'm also, one of the other reasons I actually remember right after we started, one of the reasons why I came is because Krishna and I were talking about facilitating conversations around the issue of race. And that was kind of the first part of this. So I had actually, at the time, been facilitating a conversation around race at the Green Acre Center of Learning, shameless plug. And I think I'm going to continue to do that. I think one of the things that we'll think about more is how the creative process engenders participation from a large swath of people. I think whenever you're engaging in very difficult conversations that touches the heart, especially where if you don't necessarily recognize your reality and how our reality affects you, you can get offended, and you may not think that it applies to you, but it applies to everybody. But I think the creative process engenders participation in a way that everybody can find a doorway into that space. And as I want to include as many people as possible in this, for if nothing else, my own safety, I think there's nothing better than to include the creative process in the work that I do. And I think the other part is collaborating with more people. I think this has been a great opportunity for continued work that we do together, and create new ideas and expanding the network of cohorts.
So Richard told us at the end of our class, now I'm setting you people loose. Express your vision. What do you think? We're so grateful that you were here today. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to sing together again now.
We would be one.
palace today, we keep the light within us, and I offer these closing words. Clearing. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it, and only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. Please join in the unison benediction printed in the order of the service. Go in peace.
Speak truth. Give thanks each day. Strengthen the earth and all creatures, for they are alive like you. Care for your body is a wondrous gift.